This is Big Tasty Sports.
Welcome to the DFS Huddle for week 3 here on Big Tasty Sports. We are going to be talking tonight about some of the plays that you might want to consider for your DFS lineups this week. There definitely is more and more injury news coming in, so you want to make sure that you're checking that out as well. Obviously, with DFS, it is a game where you have to be paying attention all the way up until kickoff and making adjustments as needed. We're recording this on Thursday night, so obviously there is likely to be news that will come out after this is recorded. Yanni hopefully will be able to jump on with me in a little bit, but he is fighting with some customer service right now. We wish him the best, and so we're going to start. I'm actually going to talk a little bit about some work I was doing this week on offenses that are the most consolidated. Before I do that, though, I do just want to ask you, please like the video, subscribe to the channel if you haven't done that already. There's a lot of content coming out. Also, you can check out bigtastysports.com. I've been putting a lot of articles out there with different research that I'm doing and also a lot of the bets that I'm making, kind of like official bets or whatever. I'm putting out there in articles with a little bit of an explanation of why I'm betting what I'm betting, teaser legs, props, all kinds of stuff. So check out bigtastysports.com. And you can sign up for the newsletter there as well on the main homepage. All right, so what I want to talk about first is some offenses in the NFL where the usage is really condensed. And here's the reason why that matters. I mean, maybe it's self-evident, but in case, you're not quite sure why that would matter. The more spread out the offensive production is, the more you have to figure out who the guy is that's going to go off in a given week. So let me give you a couple examples of this. First of all, let's talk about Buffalo. High-powered offense. There's going to be plenty of weeks where you want to have Buffalo in your DFS lineups. So you're going to take Josh Allen as your quarterback. And you say, probably I'm going to take Stephon Diggs, right? That's sort of a normal place to go. Maybe I'm also going to want to throw in James Cook because James Cook has been ripping off some long runs. He's looking really good. He's involved in the passing game. We got to see what happens with his touchdowns still. But, man, this is a guy that has high upside, so I might want to include James Cook. But then there's Gabe Davis. I mean, he's the big play guy. And so, Gabe Davis, there's going to be a lot of weeks where he sucks up some of the yardage and probably a touchdown or two. But, man, if we're going to talk about touchdowns, I mean, the Bills really like to go to their tight ends. Knox is scoring a touchdown almost every week if he's not injured. But then Kincaid is this rookie who's just got all kinds of upside, and he's bound to have a big week. You get the point here. You got some tough decisions to make. And obviously salary comes into play here. You can probably get 3 of the guys from the Bills in there if you choose not to use Stephon Diggs. If you use Diggs, you got to drop down to somebody cheaper. Maybe you can get him in one of the tight ends. And so on any given week, what you're saying is not only the Bills are going to have a good offensive week, but also I'm going to be able to pick which guys on the Bills are going to have a good offensive week. And certainly there are times where there are matchups that are best against another defense. Maybe a defense gives up a lot of yardage to tight ends or to outside receivers, or they're not good against the run or whatever. So those things play in, and you can pick off the people who are likely to be best. So I'm not saying never play the Bills, or like Kansas City's another one. I mean, we'll talk about Kansas City because they have Kelsey, but then after that, what is it? You got a list of like 6 receivers and a running back. Who are you picking? Unless you just go Mahomes and Kelsey, which is something you could consider doing. On the other hand, though, if you can find teams where the offensive usage is pretty consolidated, now all of a sudden, all that you are betting on really is this team is going to have a really good day offensively. Because if they have a good day, there is a very high percentage chance that it's going to be certain guys that go off. All right, I'm going to pick up this thought in a moment. I'll finish it up and I'll get Yanni's thoughts on it. But Yanni's here, so I'm going to let him in. All right, Yanni, welcome in. Glad that you were able to make it. Are all your customer service woes put to rest?
They are not. And if I'm not mistaken, Arthur Blank owns the Falcons still, I think.
I think so.
And I think he also is still the owner of the Home Depot. As a result, I will not be backing the Falcons anytime soon.
You're not going to like my Bijan Robinson love this week.
Without getting into it, because it's not relevant to the podcast here, but Can anyone ever do anything right, like ever, anywhere? It just doesn't seem like it to me. I'm sorry.
Just you and DFS. That's
I
someone who can
guess.
do something right.
I
But
guess. We'll leave it
generally with
at
customer service, they cannot. It's true.
that.
No fun. Well, hey man, before we get into like the regular stuff, I was just talking a little bit about some of this this idea of like looking for offenses where the usage is more consolidated. And so just wanted to get your thoughts on it real quick too. I had shared the Bills as an example of a team who are going to have a lot of good offensive weeks, but you got to figure out which people to pick off in that case. Where, for instance, if you look at a team like the Saints, for instance, you've got Olave, Thomas, and Shaheed, and they're making up 70% of the targets in the passing game. And until Kamara comes back, there's not a whole lot going on in the run game. And so really what you're betting on then, from my perspective in DFS, is will the Saints have a big day or not? Because if they do, it's going to be those guys. Yes, Johnson could maybe catch a touchdown or something, but it's likely based on usage, those three. Is that something that plays in when you think about DFS at all or not, in terms of trying to find teams that are likely to have a big week, but also have very consolidated usage on offense?
Yeah, I mean, I think you have to look at it that way a little bit, because like you said, if not, you are really having to strategically play matchups with teams that do spread the ball around. And that can be effective also, but I think you've got to be really strategic on how you do that. And I'll use an example. If a team is playing the Denver Broncos, for example, Sertan is very solid on one side. They've had trouble on the other side. So normally, you may steer clear of that number one weapon on a game against the Broncos, but you might use that as an opportunity to play one of the other wide receivers. So, I mean, I think you can look at it both ways, but there's something to be said about guys that are going to be involved heavily every week, and you don't really have to worry about others poaching a lot of the work. So I think, you bring up a really good point with that. I'll just say the last thing on that. Years ago, I mean, the Cardinals were horrible. This goes back a long time. And David Boston was the only weapon they had on that offense. And it's like
David Boston.
Yeah, as bad as that team was, that was, if you could get David Boston, you were golden, because he was going to get 15 targets every week and he was going to be the only guy to move the chains and whatever. So I think, again, when you look at those players that can be consolidated every week, that can be a huge advantage.
Yeah, for sure. Man, that's Puka right now. He's leading the NFL in target share, which is insane, but 33 targets on 91 pass plays that he's been in there. I mean, a third of the time, over a third of the time, he's being targeted, which is just, that was probably, plus 10,000 going into the season if there had been a bet on that. So
yeah, no doubt.
But, well, hey man, let's jump into this DK the lineups this week, and we'll maybe not do all the tiers. We'll just go through especially like quarterback, tight end. We'll just hit the whole thing. So let's start out with quarterbacks. As you are searching for the guys that you want to play this week, what have you narrowed it down to?
Quarterback's interesting this week. And I think the first couple weeks we talked about, I generally don't invest in the quarterback position. I try to find the guy that's a little bit lower. But it's a little harder to do that in week 3. There's not a lot at the bottom there that really catches my eye. So I think you kind of have, at least for me, I have to spend a little bit here. Obviously at the top, I mean, you look at a guy like Mahomes, he should have a huge day. Herbert should have a big day. So, there's some options up there, but to be honest, my favorite quarterback this week is in that, I guess, maybe next tier down. And that's your guy, Kirk Thuggins there. I think that this is a great week to play him. I think that, they're going to throw the ball a lot in this game would be my guess. If they can protect him, heck, even if they can't, he's slinging the ball around pretty well. And even if he does make a mistake or two in fantasy, that's okay. You can still get by with that. So I love Cousins this week. To be honest, I'm going to center pretty much all of my lineups around him. Wow. When you get a little bit lower, there's just not a lot. I mean, you could look at a guy like Russell Wilson and say, maybe you take a crack at him, but I just, there's not enough there for me to want to do that. A guy like Jordan Love, he's been kind of good, but I don't know, that Saints defense has been okay. So there's not a lot towards the bottom that I really like here. And I don't really trust a guy like CJ Stroud yet. So I'll pay up a little bit, save the money from a Mahomes, whatever. And I'm rolling with Kirk Cousins this week. What about you?
Oh man. Well, I better get at least one lineup where I'm rolling with Kirk Cousins, because if he goes big and I don't have it, I'm going to be very, very sad about it. So no, I do agree with you that in that game, I mean, that I bet the Vikings on the money line. They've been tossing it all over, man. Like, they're hardly running the ball. And I like that Kirk's been getting it out fast. Like you said, even if pressure is coming, a lot of the plays they're running, he doesn't have to sit back there and try to hold the ball and go deep. So I like it. I do have a few other guys I like this week, though, as I was building out lineups, and you mentioned a few of them, but I'll just get your thoughts on at least one or two you didn't. I'm interested in going back to your guy Jared Goff this week. Last week was, kind of okay. And this week, I wonder about the game script with Atlanta coming in, but I don't think Atlanta's defense is great. Like, I think it's middling, and they're playing in the Dome in Detroit again. And so I think it's and part of what interests me is when we get into the other pieces, Amon-Ra St. Brown is dealing with turf toe. And from what I've heard from people, even if he plays, it likely diminishes his productivity because it's such a painful injury. So Josh Reynolds is a guy that has been really having some production. Sam Laporta, if David Montgomery is out, this is getting into a lot of other positions, but you got Jahmyr Gibbs, who we hope at least would garner a little bit more usage if Montgomery's out. So part of it to me was, I like the other pieces of this stack the way it's falling this week in particular. And is Goff good enough for me to want to play a Lions stack? And so maybe not as a one-off, but I think in a stack I'm interested in him. And then, okay, this one makes me throw up in my mouth. I'm just going to say it, though. I'm thinking about Deshaun Watson. He's 6,100, so he's pretty cheap. And here's the deal, is I think he sucks. We talk about this a lot, right? It's not me thinking he's good, but Nick Chubb is out. They're going against a front with Tennessee that we have established is really good against the run. And so I feel like even if Jerome Ford is really involved, I think some of that has to be in the passing game. And I think he's going to have to try to get the ball out quickly. And this is one of those consolidation places where Amari Cooper and Elijah Moore are getting like all the targets here. And I know David Njoku could get some, and he's had a few. So I have not put him in a lineup, but I'm thinking about it just because I think the upside is big and I don't think many people will play him. Thoughts on that one?
Well, you're right. I don't think he'll be rostered heavily at least in single entry contests.
For good reason.
Yeah, I can't get with that. Obviously, I mean, your logic makes sense. I mean, I think you're right. You could potentially look at whoever is quarterbacking against Tennessee every week, and because of the reasons you said, you can consider them because you really probably aren't going to run on them. So you're going to have to try to throw the ball, and they've been vulnerable, against the pass. So I think you could look at that. But I think, I look at this as, to me, even without Nick Chubb, I think this is going to be one of those physical kind of, knock him out type games. I actually lean towards the under in this game as far as a betting perspective goes.
The under 36 and a half, by the way.
Yes.
I know. I'm there with you, Yanni. I'm there with you, but it's just crazy.
Yeah. I mean, I think obviously first 1 to 20 wins this. So, I don't know. I mean, I've got to see something. And look, sometimes with DFS, you want to try to catch lightning in a bottle here. And maybe that's what it is. You find the game where everything lines up well for Watson and he can go crazy. I haven't seen it yet. I've seen no indication that he can throw the ball effectively. He doesn't seem to have the running prowess that he had in his rookie and second year there. So I can't do it. I just can't do it. Especially for me, it's an $800 difference between him and a guy like Cousins, who I pointed out there.
Fair enough.
If he was at 5,100, then maybe you could say, okay, now I'm really saving money and, I'm going to try to whatever. But I kind of look at that and even like Goff you mentioned, I mean, I think he's 6,500. So, I mean, it's so close there that I just don't think the value's there. Maybe if he was in the mid 5,000s even, but I can't do it.
All right, maybe we'll scrub it from the record that I mentioned his name because I'm not a huge fan. So
I hope he doesn't have 6 touchdowns this week because you're going to be really mad at me if that happens. So.
Yeah, totally. No, I won't be, but I am going to throw out 2 other ones, and this is going all the way down to the bottom. But I have, and again, my reasons here are more stacking reasons than anything. But I actually am interested in CJ Stroud. He's 5,300, so there is a bigger difference. And here's the reason is I like that Jacksonville versus Houston game for there to potentially be a lot of points. I think the most likely game script is Jacksonville goes up quite a bit, but what we've seen from Houston is when that happens, they throw the ball. And they have been able to at least gain a lot of yards and have some production there when they're putting the ball in the air a lot. And so I think you like Nico Collins. I think Tank Dell is interesting now that he's getting more playing time. And then you can come back on the other side with some like ETN and Ridley or something like that. And so for me, it's a way to get in that game, but get different than all the people who are going to play the Jags stack and try to be different on the other side.
Yeah, and there is potential upside there for sure. I mean, we got a glimpse of potentially what CJ Stroud and that Texans passing game can do. I mean, you can absolutely stack him and Nico Collins, and like you said, that leaves you a lot of bank to bring in a guy like ETN or Ridley, or even look at another game if you want to do that. So, I mean, I think you can certainly make that case. I'm not sold yet on Stroud. And I think that even though I'm with you, I think points are going to be good in this game. It's kind of one of those I need to see a little bit more from both teams here before I really dive into that.
6 points from the Jags wasn't enough to convince you?
That offense is sputtering. And granted, a game with Houston, it should be a get right spot, a home game with Houston.
You hope, but
totally. Yeah, you never know. You never know.
All right. Well, that's some good quarterback talk. And anytime that we think something could be good for the Vikings, I'll take it. So let's move on to running backs. And let's just break this into two pieces. So let's start with $6,000 and up. So more of that top end. What are the running backs you want to look to in that range?
Well, you mentioned Bijan Robinson. I mean, if you have the money or want to kind of build your lineup, I think he's going to continue to be more and more evolved. I think as the season goes on, that workload's going to be less 50-50 with Tyler Algier and more 60-40, maybe even 70-30. He's just so freaking good. I mean, they're going to have to play him and they're going to have to get him the ball. And obviously, I would say it's a pretty favorable matchup. Now the Lions run defense has been okay. The first couple weeks have been awful. But I think it's an okay matchup here for him. So I think you can look that way. Obviously, I mean, I think Pollard is an option at the top, but, a little too pricey for my taste. He should have a big game against Arizona, but, that's a lot of money. I think you mentioned ETN. Like, to me, this is a get right game for him. I would expect him to really have a nice game here. But I would say, the other two that I would consider here as I'm looking, it's a little risky, but I think Ramondre Stevenson is in play this week. I think you can consider him based on the type of game I think we're going to get here. Now, he has not looked great. That offensive line has not looked great. But I think in this game, they are going to be able to kind of get back to him a little bit. But really, I would say my favorite play for me this week, and it's not a guy I really love in DFS. I really don't. But this week I like him, and that's Kenneth Walker. I think that, he's got a home matchup in a game that they should be winning. And to me, that's Pete Carroll handing him the rock a lot. And I think going into the season, the concern with Walker was he was going to be in a timeshare, and he really hasn't been. I mean, he has been the number one guy. So he wasn't extremely productive last week from a yardage standpoint, but he did get in the end zone twice. And I think this week we're going to see more of the yardage production. And obviously, again, in a game that I think they're going to be ahead. I mean, I would certainly, I basically expect him to score at least once in this game. So he's a guy, I think he's 6,200.
Yep.
So, yeah, 6,200. Yep. So he's probably my favorite running back play this week.
Yeah, so I'll be honest, he was not on my radar until I read your article, and I think the case you make for him is a really good one, especially at that price point. Probably the thing that kept me off is not running to play a running back against Carolina's defense,
right?
Because they've been solid. But Kenneth Walker can has that big play potential too, is what I'm trying to say. Like, he can get some big chunks, so it doesn't have to be 5 yards at a time all the time. And I think that's good because that just requires a defense to make a few mistakes. And to your point, if they're ahead, then he's going to be getting a lot of opportunity. Although he is going to have to go against the Red Rocket on Sunday, so I don't know how you feel about that.
No, one thing I will say too about that, though, we talk obviously a lot about matchups, and we saw Carolina and we joked about it. I mean, that was their Super Bowl the other night. I mean, that they were out there at home trying to play on national TV. They got to go across the country.
Yeah.
They're 0-2. They realize their offense can't score points. Like, is that defense, for 4 quarters going to be able to fire it up and really want to hit a guy like, Kenneth Walker? That factors in too, I think, when you look at this matchup.
Yeah. No, I think that's a good point. That's a really good point. So for me, I like Robinson quite a bit. And I have him in 2 out of the 3 lineups that I've built so far. I mean, I'll build some more out as well. Man, he's just so dynamic. And I just feel like any matchup where it's okay, I almost want to play him right now because I'm afraid these prices are going to be gone within a few weeks.
Right.
And so I like him. I actually like Tony Pollard, but the main reason is in a couple of my lineups, I've used the Cowboys as a secondary stack with Pollard, Lamb, and Ferguson, and that's fit in really well. And so I agree with you that he's a little, especially in a game where it's like, man, if they're up big, they may even just sit him, let somebody else get the touches. So I am a little concerned about that, and I don't know if I'll stick with it. If he plays the whole game, there's certainly huge upside potential, but you do have to be concerned of whether he'll play the whole game or not. And then I like Travis Etienne. I mean, no mystery there. Why, right? If that game's going to be high scoring, he's been playing great. I like him as well at 6,900. I think is pretty reasonable. So, all right, let's drop down to the bottom half of the price sheet. I don't know what I should call it. Who do you like on the bottom?
Not a lot, to be honest with you. I mean, this is definitely a week for me where the flex is not coming from the running back position, just because there's not a whole lot I like there. I mean, I think Breece Hall is an interesting option because he did not get the ball last week. He was vocal about it, and I think they are going to work him. Now, again, he's still working through an injury, and he's got a tough matchup. Now, granted, I think it's a matchup where I mentioned Ramondre Stevenson. I think we're going to see a lot of running on both sides there. I mean, I think you can look at him. I think, an interesting guy is Zach Moss, only because he basically got 100% of the snap share last
Yeah, that's right. And looked okay with him, too.
He did okay. Now, he's got a little tougher matchup, obviously, going against the Ravens there. So I don't love him just because of the matchup. I think what you can really look at here, though, that's to me is interesting is you can look and this is where a little bit of what you talked about in the opening, you almost have to guess the right spot is one of the Kansas City Chiefs running backs. And Pacheco's a little bit dinged up. And I would say this, if Pacheco does not go in this game, and they may rest him, it's a hamstring, it's a game they're favored by double digits. I mean, he may not go. I think you could look at Clyde Edwards-Helaire or Jerick McKinnon in this game. And, both of those guys cost nothing, and they could potentially get you a lot of points. So that probably remains until an hour and a half before kickoff on Sunday, because you're going to need to see who, if Pacheco's up. But I can tell you, they should run all over the Bears in this game. It's just a matter of who's going to get the carry. So you either have to guess that, or if Pacheco's out, you go with one of the other two, and you should be all right.
I was just looking up the price on Edwards-Helaire, so 4,100, which is about as cheap as you can get. That's interesting. I actually had not heard that about Pacheco, so I'm glad you said that, because I had Pacheco on my list, feeling like a running back against the Bears would be a good spot to go to. So, like you're saying, McKinnon or Edwards-Helaire, if Pacheco is out, I think is definitely worth considering.
Yeah, it looks like he had limited practice. So, I mean, Pacheco will probably go, and that muddies it up a little bit, because you're probably getting a triple share at that point. But, again, something to monitor. It could be one of those things where they just stopped like, hey, we're going to let you rest this week. I mean, we have to wait and see.
Yeah. A couple other guys that I like here. One is Joshua Kelly. If Eckler's out, I mean, again, getting a piece of that Minnesota Chargers game, and Minnesota's not going to exactly bottle up the run completely or something. So I think he's in a good spot there. And then let's see, I had McKinnon written down. And then this goes back to what we were saying about Pollard. I mean, if you wanted to take a flyer, this would get you different, is you could go to Deuce Vaughn at 4,400. It's cheap. If he ends up playing most of the second half, he's looked good when he's been in there. And he's getting more and more opportunity. So I think there's a chance that even if Pollard plays a lot of the game, it's not like he gets you zero, but it's definitely limited. if he doesn't get some extra usage.
Low floor, high ceiling. I mean, that's
yeah, that's right.
Right.
That's right. Yep. All right, I'm with you, man. It's funny how week to week it can be like, oh, I love all the running backs this week. And then the next week you're like, oh, I don't really like any of the running backs this week.
It's crazy week to week how it varies. It really is.
Yep. It's honestly, I will say that's one of the things that I've enjoyed as I've done a lot more with DFS this year than I ever have before, is it's almost like a discovery every week of like, oh, which positions are going to be ones that I like this week? And you get into all your stuff and then you kind of figure it out, which is a lot of fun.
Right. So. Yep.
All right, well, let's go to wide receiver, and I'm really interested in sort of this top tier, or at least like the number ones on a lot of these teams. But let's go with $6,000 and up again for wide receiver, because there are, even as you get down toward that 6,000, there's quite a few number ones in there. So, what do you think? At the position that I would say, it sounds like you too are more interested in this week. A lot of good stuff to look at receiver.
Yeah, and I think, to be honest, I think there's a lot of good stuff kind of in that more middle tier of receiver. I'm actually a little hesitant on the top. Now, I love Jefferson this week. I think he's going to have a huge game, but obviously he's the most expensive option out there. If you're playing, a Cousins Jefferson type stack, you're not leaving yourself a lot of room to do a whole lot else. But
Yanni, I gotta say real quick, I'm hopeful that this could be the week we cash the bet you brought up, which is 1 200-yard game from Justin Jefferson. It would be really nice to get that this week.
I was just going to say, like, this could be the 200-yard game. So, yeah,
let's do it.
But, I love him. But again, I don't know that you're going to be able, unless you specifically build your lineup around him. Obviously he's pricey. I don't like Tyreek Hill this week. And actually, it's funny. I mentioned Patrick Surtain, but he's kind of got that matchup. And I think Waddle, it doesn't look like is going to play. And obviously you can devote a little bit more emphasis to stopping Hill when you don't have to worry about Waddle on the other side. Excuse me. I don't like Diggs this week. I think, weather's a factor. I think that Washington defenses can be a little nasty. So I don't love Diggs here. I'm actually going down a little bit lower. I think Keenan Allen's a guy who's proven he can get it done. You kind of mentioned the stack here in that game with potential points. I think you can look at Allen, although if you've noticed, this is a really crazy stat. Allen is not great in domes for whatever reason.
Really?
It's weird. I looked and I was reading and I'm like, that's really strange. So again, that could just be circumstance. He doesn't play in domes that often. Maybe when he does, for whatever reason, he didn't have great games. But it just kind of worries me a little bit. It's like, okay, is there something there? So for me, it's like I'm dropping down a little bit further. A guy that I really like this week, who I'm not high on overall, but he's actually done well, and that's Michael Pittman. With Indianapolis. And you kind of mentioned they don't really spread it around much. It's kind of the same few guys that are getting in on the action there. And he has a pretty favorable matchup. That Baltimore secondary is thin. It's banged up. They're missing, a couple of their key players back there. I think Pittman catches a lot of passes in this game. And he is kind of that guy in a PPR league where you look up and it's like, oh my God, he's caught 9 passes, and whatever. And I think that we could see that from Pittman here. So for me, when I look at his price tag at 6,200 and I compare it to, whatever, even a Calvin Ridley, let's just say at 7,200, I like that value there, comparatively speaking, this week. Now, again, not necessarily all the time, but this week. So those are, kind of my thoughts on some of the higher end guys up there. Not a lot there either. Which may be why, I have a lineup with Jefferson and Cousins in it. So,
yeah, just to back up what you're saying on Pittman, 83 passing snaps where he's had routes, 21 of them he's been targeted. So on that Colts team, that's a lot. You probably don't want to, but if you wanted to secondary stack and you have room, Granson is a cheap tight end, and he's had 10 targets for this offense. And you got probably Gardner Minshew playing still, which I think for those pass catchers is actually a good thing, not a bad thing. I don't know if it's a good thing for the Colts overall, but for pass catching, it's good. So, yeah, in that top tier, I mean, part of the problem is I look at I actually love what you said is starting with Tyreek Hill. I'm pointing like everyone can see my screen right now, which no one can, but Tyreek Hill, Stephon Diggs, Amon-Ra St. Brown. I talked about the turf toe, so I don't like that.
Yeah.
If I stack up the Cowboys, I would use CeeDee Lamb because of the usage. I wouldn't want to stack the Cowboys and not use him. So that, again, is the decision of, do I think these guys are going to play for the whole game or not? Yeah. I am interested in him if I decide to do that. Jalen Waddle, probably not playing. I don't know. Like, I'm not super interested in the Seahawks pass catchers this week. So to your point, there's a lot of these that just kind of weed themselves out for me. and it gets me down basically to Pittman, and then Mike Williams, maybe. I mean, what you said about Keenan Allen, basically the Vikings are blitzing a ton this year and not getting home. And so Herbert's probably going to have time to stand back there and push the ball down the field if he wants to, which probably helps Mike Williams. So I think Keenan Allen is definitely in play, but I don't mind coming down to Mike Williams just above 6,000. I mean, Mike Williams in week 1 was the guy that I was like, man, I got to have Mike Williams. And yes, he's had 2 bad weeks, but this is a guy, if you look back, that he does that and he does that, and then he has a huge week.
Yeah, it feels like he is a ticking time bomb that way, that, it's going to be 150 yards and 2 touchdowns on one of these weeks. And obviously, I think this, to your point, could be that week where that could happen.
Yeah. I mean, if you wanted to not go to Allen, you could even, and you wanted to stack, you could do him and Joshua Kelly
Sure.
as a Chargers stack potentially. So, all right, dropping below 6,000, I have too many people written down probably below 6,000. What are you thinking?
Yeah, I'm with you. I think there's a lot of options. I think we have to look a little bit, potentially at the injury reports, but I think Amari Cooper is an interesting option. You mentioned Deshaun Watson. I don't know that like I said, I could get behind that, but I think if I needed a one-off receiver, I think Cooper at his price tag, assuming he's healthy, this is the type of game. He's at home. They're going to have to throw. I mean, I feel like this is a game where he gets in the end zone, makes some catches. So that I think is an option. Your guy, Jordan Addison, we talked about potentially stacking there. I think he and KJ Osborne are both potentially at least worth a look. And then a guy that we talked about, I think after week 1 is Zay Flowers. I mean, that price point, he's at 5,400. And I mean, at this point, he's a number 1 receiver. Not to mention OBJ is out now. So, a little less competition for targets there. Not that OBJ was heavily involved anyways, but I think, Flowers is clearly that number 1 receiver, maybe not counting Mark Andrews, but at least at receiver. So when you look at that price point, I mean, I like him this week better than a lot of those guys in that high 6,000 range. And, he's at that 5,400 mark. So I think you can definitely look at a guy like that. You mentioned Nico Collins. I think that's, this is another week where you could potentially play him. And, I'm just looking to see who else I've got, because I know I had on there. Kind of in the same vein of Flowers is Rashad Bateman. I mean, with, again, OBJ out, and I know Bateman is a little bit hit or miss, and he's kind of been the forgotten guy, but he's $4,600. And I think in a game like this against a not good Colts secondary, I mean, we saw what happened to them last week. I think Bateman and Flowers are both options. So, I mean, I think you could look at either of them. You might have to get a little bit lucky on what you do there. And then, just dropping down kind of to the bottom of the barrel, so to speak there. You mentioned Josh Reynolds. I think he's still an option. Now he's a little banged up too, but we had him last week and he certainly produced, and I think he could do that again. So, I mean, those are kind of some of the guys lower down there that I think you really can take a look at here.
Yeah, you ticked off a fair number of the ones that I've written down, and I won't read everyone that I have written down because I certainly have to narrow it.
Let me add one more real quick. Just
sure.
Before I forget,
Yep.
I have them written down here, and that's Braxton Berrios. And again, if Waddle's out, the attention was Surtain and the Broncos to Hill. I think Berrios gets an increase in snaps in that game. And when he's in there, they look to him, they get him the ball. He's quick. He can make plays. He's, that kind of thing. And he's only 3,600. So, he's kind of one of those guys where if you build your lineup and you're like, I only got a little bit of money left, you could slot him in, kind of like what we were saying. Low floor for sure, but very high ceiling this week.
Yeah, honestly, if Waddle's out, I like it, man. Yeah. I mean, they have to go somewhere, and we'll talk about tight end in a minute. But especially if Tyreek's being taken away, man, you wonder what that does to this offense. But he's going to have to be involved, I would think. So,
yep.
So I had Amari Cooper written down. Definitely Addison if you want to stack the Vikings. Man, they've looked to him in the end zone, so I think that's a good look for him. Zay Flowers, 100% with you, man. This guy's getting targeted a ton, and again, I think he's just going to keep moving up salary-wise, and so I like getting him in there. Nico Collins, I had written down. Reynolds, I like Shaheed. Oh, and that was one I didn't say because I had it on a different already in my lineup was Olave. I have used those 3 Saints receivers as a secondary stack in one of my lineups because going against Green Bay, not the easiest matchup. But again, if they can have a big day, those 3 guys go off, I think. So I don't mind that. Osborne you could use if you're stacking the Vikings. I think he's only $4,000, so that's a way to get a cheaper piece. And then I'll just talk about a couple kind of long shots because you hit on a lot of the ones that I would say I like kind of to use more frequently already. One is Marvin Mims Jr. with the Broncos. Now, this is like, man, the floor is in the basement, but the ceiling is really high. He had 2 catches for 115 yards or something. I mean, I don't know if Peyton doesn't like him or what, where he's not getting more opportunity, but it seems like if he got opportunity, he could really go off. And he's someone sort of like Hyatt on the Giants, who I talked about last week, where it's like maybe you only need a couple catches out of him and you're okay because he's $3,900. So I don't think I'm going to play him a lot, but I just think it's an interesting one to watch what they do with him as the season progresses.
Yeah, and a good matchup. I mean, he's gonna be, potentially going against zone and or Eli Apple, which is, appealing.
Right.
And in a game where we think the Dolphins are probably going to put up points because they certainly have done that the first 2 weeks. So, could they be chucking it around? And like you said, could be a wide open game. So no, I think that's interesting.
Yeah. And then the other one for me, and this is, I have to hold my nose about as much as I have to hold it for Deshaun Watson. But this came out of the research I was doing just on usage, and it's Jonathan Mingo on the Panthers. But this guy's he has the most targets on the team in terms of receiving. So he's getting opportunity. Now that doesn't mean he's doing a lot with it, but he's $3,400. So if you get a guy that's being targeted a decent amount, and who knows with Andy Dalton if the targets will look different too. Maybe he looks to Thielen even more or something, but just another one of those where if you're going all the way down to the bottom, I feel like almost the best that I can hope for is who's going to get an opportunity. Sure. And at least so far this year, he's had one. But like you were just talking about, if Waddle's out and Berrios is $200 more, definitely would go there.
Yeah.
So, all right. I appreciate you not leaving the stream when I said the words Jonathan Mingo. That was very nice of you. All right. Let's move on to tight end, and we'll just take the whole position at once here. We won't break it into tiers or anything. What do you think about tight end?
Well, I think really the top 4 there are all good plays. The problem is obviously their price tag. So, and again, unless you want to build around Patrick Mahomes and Travis Kelce, that's up to you. But I think to your point, you mentioned a guy like Sam Laporta there at 4,000. I think Njoku's a nice play here this week as well. Kind of has the opportunity, I think, to potentially score here. So I like him. Going down a little further, I think you mentioned Ferguson with Dallas. Here's a guy that I think they want. I sound like Chris Collinsworth. Here's a guy. Here's a guy that I think they want to get him more involved. They seem high on him. He's been somewhat involved the first couple weeks, this last week a little bit, but I think this could definitely be a good spot for him. So I think Ferguson, he's at 3,600. And then I think, a couple others. Zach Ertz, you actually mentioned this today, and I saw them talking about that. He's the most targeted tight end in the league through 2 weeks. So
crazy.
You got Dobbs, who tight end is kind of that security blanket. Obviously, Ertz is a veteran. He's kind of been forgotten about, but we forget it was only a couple seasons ago that he was one of the best tight ends in the league. It was only a couple years ago. So, I think he's interesting. And then Dalton Kincaid, my guy there with the Bills, I think he's an option this week. Dawson Knox is questionable, and I think it's a legitimate questionable that he's going to play. And if he doesn't, we're going to see obviously a ton of Kincaid. And I think that Josh Allen proved last week he's kind of dialing it back with a little bit of that crazy gunslinger, and he kind of went to more of that short, quick passing game. And Kincaid kind of got some looks early in the game. So if Knox is out, I think Kincaid is a definite play here. And then the last one, I mentioned him last week, and he kind of laid an egg, but I think you can look at him again. That's Adam Troutman. With Denver here. Again, he is the primary snap getter at this point. The Dolphins do not defend the tight end well. They haven't for the last couple of years. And again, a game where we think it's going to be high scoring. So, even though he laid an egg last week, you might consider, if you need to save the money, giving him a second chance, obviously knowing that he's goose egged once, he could do it again.
Right. He could do it again. Yeah. A lot of similarity here. I love Ferguson, man. I mean, at $3,600, the way that he's being used, I mean, they're going to him like they did to Schultz or more.
Right.
So I think that is a steal. I mean, that's Zay Flowers territory or Bijan Robinson territory steal for me. If you want to construct a team of the guys that might be underpriced at this point, I would definitely put him on that list.
Totally agree. Totally agree.
Yep. So I love that one just for the price point, depending on what else you're doing. I agree with you. I mean, if I was going to do a Chiefs stack, I think I would just do Mahomes Kelsey.
Yeah.
And that takes away a lot of the other stuff you can do, but you're just throwing a dart after that to try to, maybe you even throw in like an Edwards-Helaire or something,
Right.
if Pacheco's out. But so I could see using Kelsey that way if you wanted to do it. Hawkinson certainly deserves consideration in the game he's going to be in. And I would say same for Gerald Everett because he's a 3,800 and who knows what usage he gets, but he's pretty cheap. A couple others that I'll just throw in that I think are interesting to consider at least. The first one is Taysom Hill. Watching that game last week, it feels like they're starting to use him in some of the high leverage situations again and giving him running opportunities. And if he gets running opportunities, a lot of times it's pound the ball and I got 2 yards. But it feels like inevitably he also gets the 25 or 30-yard one that he breaks it for. And maybe he comes in on the goal line and gets a touchdown. So he's 3,300. And when I'm looking at people around him, other than Ferguson, it's like, man, if they're going to use him that way, it's a great value if they do.
Yeah, and you bring up a really good point. And to be honest, I didn't really consider Hill until just listening to you. You kind of sold me a little bit on him. But they're thin at running back this week too, right?
Exactly. Yep.
So like you said, how do we know he doesn't get a dozen carries? I mean, it could happen. So
I really think it could.
Yeah, for sure. That's really interesting. And it's like he tends to be the guy you overlook, right? You never really pay close attention
Totally.
to him. But I think that you're right. This is a week where it could absolutely be a Taysom Hill type game.
Yeah. And that's one of those too. I mean, now I'm talking myself into making sure I probably won't use them across the board.
Sure. Yeah.
But his role is the kind where if he does what he's done at times in the past and they give him that role, and this week is a situation because of the running back situation where you could see it happening, it's like slate winning type stuff because no other tight end's going to do what he does then.
Right.
The other one for me is Durham Smythe. This goes back to that Dolphins situation. He's actually the third most targeted behind Hill and Waddle on the team right now. And so he hasn't done a ton with it. And I don't think he's great, but he's $2,900. Yeah. And if Waddle's out, they got to throw to somebody. So that's Berrios, Smythe, maybe. I don't know. So he's on my list.
Yep. Agreed.
All right. Let's hit the defense special teams here quick. Again, obviously, it's nice to save money here if you can, but sometimes you have to take a defense that's going to produce as well. Which way are you leaning?
If you have the money, boy, both the Cowboys and Chiefs are pretty appealing this week if you have the money. But where I like looking, and not so much now, this was more Bryce Young based, but I like the Seahawks, and I know they have a bad defense. They don't necessarily rush particularly well, but I think that matchup against that Carolina offense at home, there's some definite potential there for sure. Beyond that, I'm just trying to see who else I had circled here. Unless you're going to spend the money, I think at that point you drop down. But actually, I hate to say it, but I think the Commanders are an option you can play at the bottom end here. And not that I necessarily expect them to, shut out the Bills. But again, this is potentially going to be a rainy type game. We've seen the statistics of Josh Allen turning it over. And even when he doesn't, he still gets sacked. The Bills' offensive line is not good. You've heard me preach that before. And with that defensive front, even if the Bills win this game, even if their offense is playing well, he could still end up sacked 4 times, So I think when you kind of look at the bottom there, if you're like, hey, I got to save some money, I think that's definitely an area that you can look.
Yep. I will just say I agree with you on Washington. For the reasons that you said. That was one of the ones I had written down at the bottom here. I love Dallas. Having Trayvon Diggs out now, that news just came out today. I mean, it's not helpful because he's kind of an interception machine. So
Right.
you maybe lose a little bit of the turnover there. But with that defensive line, I think you've still got tons of opportunity for sacks and fumbles and all that.
And they do have a deep secondary. I mean, that's the one positive. They have one of the deepest secondaries in the league. So that
Picking
helps.
up Stephon Gilmore looks even bigger now.
Right. Huge now.
Than it did.
Huge. Yeah.
So a couple others that I think are at least just interesting to consider. And a lot of this to me depends on what fits after I've done everything else.
Sure.
And that's why I throw these out there. But New England, when you're going against Zach Wilson, I consider you. And they have a good defense.
Yep.
Detroit, same thing. Desmond Ridder has had far and away the highest percentage of turnover-worthy plays this year. He's just gotten lucky. At some point, he's not going to get lucky anymore. So I could definitely see whoever he plays getting some turnovers. And then the last one, if I had to do it, I would hold my nose and play Chicago. I know their defense is bad, but here's the thing. Kansas City's offense has been sluggish so far this year. It's the defense that's looked better than the offense. And yeah, I mean, it might end up turning into a cluster, but if the Chiefs continue to not have great output on offense and they only put up 24 points, 20 points, again, it's like if I had a lineup I love and I have to sacrifice and take Chicago or take off some other player I love, I could hold my nose and do it. I'm not going to go to them on purpose. I think I would go to Washington on purpose.
Yeah. I think that's a good point. And I mean, that happens sometimes. You're like, oh man, I got this perfect roster, but now I got to play the worst defense. But you're right. I think it's worth it because, and you also never know. They could be a horrible defense and whatever. The center botches a snap and it becomes a 6-point play for the defense, even with a shitty. I mean, it happens. So I totally understand your logic behind that there. And you mentioned, I did not mention, I'm glad you mentioned, I think New England is an interesting option this week as well. So I'm glad you pointed that out because I missed that one.
It's great. Let's real quick here, just build out a lineup for fun. You want to go with the Vikings stack since that's where you're going for the most part?
Yeah, I mean, I love Cousins this week, and it's your team. Let's do it.
Do you think you put him with like Hawkinson and Addison, or where do you go in terms of the receiving targets?
I mean, I think Addison and Osborne you could definitely both put in there just, to start and then kind of see what you have.
See what you're left with.
Yeah, I think Hawkinson is probably the question mark here because he's at, what is he at here?
He was at 6,500.
Yeah, so obviously now, again, he potentially is worth it. But, that to me is the question. Do you want to invest in Hawkinson? He could definitely have a game like last week where he scores a couple touchdowns, whatever, but he could also have that 4-catch, 50-yard game, which, then you spend a lot of money and you don't get a huge return. So I don't know. To me, I'd rather wait and see, can you fit Hawkinson or Jefferson in at the end, based on that. Because I'd like to see what you said, for example, Zay Flowers, putting a guy like that in, kind of seeing how much we have left.
I threw in Taysom Hill for now for fun.
That's fine.
And I put in the Washington defense. So we've got 2 running backs and a flex left, and we have $7,500 per position. So we're probably not too far away from being able to get to Justin Jefferson if we can figure it out at running back.
I mean, I like Kenneth Walker. Obviously, I don't.
Oh, right. Yep.
Your call. I think
let's put him in. No. Let's put him in. No, this is us doing it together. That's great. Let me just put in Justin Jefferson at the flex and see what we can get to. We could go Justin Jefferson, Travis Etienne is available.
That seems
pretty
good.
solid to me.
Yeah.
So here's what we'd have. And the only thing, the main question I'd have for you here is, 2 questions. One is, it's going to be really heavy on the Vikings and we have no Chargers coming back the other way. Is that okay? But so right now it's Cousins, Walker, Etienne, Addison, Osborne, Flowers, Taysom Hill, Justin Jefferson, and the Commanders. If you had to pick one Charger to try to get in, who would it be? Would it be Williams, Kelly, Allen?
I mean, Kelly, I think is interesting. What's his price? I'm looking at his price here. He's
54. So we could take out Etienne. We could put in Kelly. And then we could get up to the Chiefs defense. I mean, anything but the Cowboys, basically. We'd have $4,000 left. Or we could look at moving up at tight end. Could get out of Osborne if we wanted to and see what else we could get there.
I mean, I would almost like to slot Berrios in there, assuming Waddle's not playing, and potentially, if you wanted to get out of Osborne, I think you save a few dollars there.
Here's what that does. That gets us to $4,400 and we got the Cowboys. So now we've at least got exposure on the Chargers. So we have Cousins, and then we have Walker and Kelly, Addison, Berrios, Flowers, and Jefferson. Jefferson's the flex, but they're all receivers. You can flip it around however you want. And then Taysom Hill is the tight end and the Cowboys defense.
What is Hill's price tag? Taysom Hill?
3,300. So if you wanted to get off of him and go to Ferguson, is that what you're thinking maybe?
I was just wondering, how far off. Yeah, I'm looking. So Ferguson's 36.
So $300, the easiest place to drop down would be to go back down to the Chiefs defense instead of the Cowboys. And then you could get to Ferguson.
Well, to me, it's whatever your preference is. I think Ferguson's probably a little more steady, but Hill may have, or you mentioned he could have some upside this week. Your call there.
I'm trying to win all the money, Yanni. So I'm going to leave it Hill and the Cowboys. I think the upside is higher, the floor is lower.
Let's do it. Let's do it. Let's hope that works.
Awesome. I like it. Well, I'll watch the injuries, but otherwise I think I will leave that one alone. I like that. And I got to get in on the Vikings, man. If the Vikings crush it, I'm never going to forgive myself for not being honest.
What if it's a 45-point game where Cousins lights it? you'd never forgive yourself.
I gotta be there, Yanni. I gotta be there.
Yeah. Well, we'll see.
We all know that I'm going to be in a heap on Sunday afternoon, morning, another Vikings 4-turnover loss. So, but we can dream.
3-0 Chargers. Yeah, right.
That's right. Hey, before we get out of here, I do just want to say too, I referenced your article earlier, but man, really great stuff on DFS, props, bets, all that kind of stuff. So if anyone is not yet following at the Bet Crushers on Twitter and you've not gone and bookmarked betcrushers.com, the website, go and do that shit right now. That's all I have to say about it. Do it.
Yeah, appreciate that. It's been a good start to the season. Let's keep our fingers crossed we can keep it rolling.
I'm with you, man. All right. Thanks for breaking it down. I'll talk to you later.
Appreciate it. Take care.